Today we are conducting this third event. Actually, this is third in this series, again jointly by CPAI and MCX, to deliberate on the findings of yet another independent research study on commodity markets, on very important and possibly one of the burning issues in the commodity markets today, the issue of quality standardization. The study, whose findings we shall shortly visit, is titled Overcoming Issues of Quality Standardization in Agricultural Commodities to Facilitate Participation in Derivatives. And this study was conducted by Professor Gopal Nayak and Dr. Manu Bansal from IIM Bangalore. And we are very happy that they have agreed to present the study findings today among us today. So before we get on to the study findings, I request Mr. Rishi Nathani, Head Business Development and Marketing, MCX, to give the theme introduction. Mr. Nathani, please.
Good afternoon, and thanks, Debojyoti. Good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome to Professor Gopal Nayak and Professor Manu Bansal, and to Narendra Vadwaji, from President of CPI. It's indeed a pleasure to have all of you here and to hear from you, and we are very eager and excited to hear from Dr. Nayak and Dr. Bansal regarding their study. So the point is that agriculture, as we all know, is the backbone of our economy. And the governments in the past and the present have been trying to get the agricultural economy up and running and integrate it with the mainstream. Now, exchanges, commodity exchanges have a very large role to play in the growth of and the organization of these agricultural practices. So, for example, farmers can take price views in terms of futures prices. They can understand what the price is going to be 3 months later or 4 months later, depending on the futures prices, and thereby make their swing decisions. So for example, if a commodity is trading at X price after 3 months and the farmer's cost of production is say 0.6x, 0.65x, then the farmer can decide to plant that commodity and sell on the futures. Also, we've got a lot of FPOs who are tying up with exchanges in order to help the small and marginal farmers. They collect the produce from all these farmers and thereafter try to deliver on the exchange platform. The regulator, SEBI, and the government have been trying very hard to facilitate them, and a lot of incentives have been given to FPOs for assaying, for warehousing, etc. The exchanges have announced a lot of things because the regulator has foregone its fee on agricultural derivative contracts in order to facilitate this fund for FPOs. So a lot of encouragement is there. However, the problem, as you know, the theme of this topic is the issue of standardization in agricultural produce. Today in India, there'll be so many varieties of any product which is grown. So for example, if you take any crop, there will be many varieties of the crop depending on geographies, depending on quality parameters, etc. And it is the exchange normally would be able to trade only a standardized commodity. So the issue comes is to how do you take the commodity which is most representative, or the quality or grade which is most representative of that commodity, and trade it on the exchanges. So the farmers can not only deliver, but also hedge on that and use that as a price benchmark for their produce. Also, within an FPO, various farmers from various fields bring their produce, how to better sort it, how to grade it, how to make it homogeneous in the sense that it can be delivered as a single lot on the exchange. Thereby, you can create that goods on the exchange platform. You can get an electronic warehouse receipt, and you can also get funding. The farmers can get funding against these warehouse receipts. Also, there's a dichotomy in the country where, for farmers, there are no rules applicable. But as soon as it comes to the, organized trading, there are so many laws and rules applicable. So how do you overcome this issue, which we faced in our cardamom contract, and various other edible contracts face is to how do you bring out this regulatory change or this balance whereby you can get these physical market practices also on the exchanges if possible. So there are a lot of diverse issues which we will discuss today, and we are eagerly looking forward to having, hearing from Dr. Nayak on this. So without any further ado, I'll hand it back to you, Debo, to take it forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nathani. Now I request Mr. Narinder Wadhwa, President of CPAI, to kindly deliver the inaugural address. Mr. Wadhwa, please.
Yeah, thank you, Dabiji. Thank you, Rishiji. Good afternoon, everyone. Our eminent speaker for today, Professor Gopal Nayak, Dr. Manu Bansal from IIM Bangalore. Respected members, आप सबका स्वागत है आज के वेबिनार में. I sincerely thank Rishi ji and team MCX for associating with CPI for this webinar. Today's webinar, as has been mentioned, is on a very relevant topic, overcoming the issue of quality standardization in agriculture commodities. Last time our topic was how future markets in India have improved the efficiency of physical commodities in India. They are all related topics. See, one of the study, as I have mentioned in the earlier seminar also, say before this pandemic, we were talking about 5 trillion economy. And one of the study by McKinsey says that 40% will come from the commodities market. So we have to ensure that these commodity markets are conducive enough, and there is a the whole chain is whatever deficiencies are there in the system, they are in place, and we fix it so that we achieve these targets. So when these exchanges were made in 2004-5, the very purpose of the market was efficient price discovery and price risk management. And our regulator has been very active, as Rishiji has just mentioned, to fix whatever issues are there in the market. Like they have introduced many of the participants, new participants in the market, like mutual funds, AIFs, and there is a lot of enthusiasm in the new players, corporates and FPOs who wants to participate. But why they are participating, why they are not participating, we have to introspect and discuss. Today's program, I think, is way towards that only. Why these people, when there is a huge potential in the market, why there is lack of participation? So one of the reason is, again, this standardization of agri markets, which I think they have, Professor Nayak has come out with a paper. We are eager to listen to that, and we, as a participant, as a CPI, we are eager to see that the whole ecosystem is in place, and whatever issues are there are fixed. So we are eager to listen to eminent speaker today. I'll not waste much of the time. I'll hand it over to you, Debajit, to take it forward. Thank you once again, and thank you MCX again for associating with the these. We are looking forward for more programs like this to make our ecosystem healthy. Thank you, Debajit.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Wadhwa. Without any ado, let me now request Professor Gopal Nayak to kindly make his presentation, and following which we shall have a brief panel discussion. Professor Nayak, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank both CPAI and MCX for giving us this opportunity to share our research results. And it's only when we share research results with the actual practitioners, we come to know more about the utility of research and how we should strengthen our research process as well. Let me share my presentation. I hope I have the, yeah. Is it visible?
Yes, yes, Dr. Nayak.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks once again. And we are very happy to be here talking to all of you, particularly those who are very much interested in commodity markets, both in the futures as well as in the spot market. Today's discussion or our presentation is about what are the issues in quality standardization in agricultural commodities and how they are affecting the markets. As many of you have said rightly, that we have not paid so much of attention on this particular aspect that it actually requires. So many of the problems have been there for a long time, but we have not been able to address it. Just to, as some of you have said, basic functions of futures market being price discovery, which basically helps us in signaling both producers and consumers, which will basically, help in proper resource allocation. So without proper resource allocation, economic growth will be low. And so any country you take, lower economic growth is mostly because of markets not functioning well. So that's where the importance of the markets exchanges comes in, that they actually provide a facility for the market fundamentals to interact, like supply demand, and therefore coming up with a appropriate price signal. That's the most important thing. Discovery of the price is most important thing. And apart from that, hedging of risk related to price is an important other function that futures market facilitate. Now that could be for long and short hedges, as well, particularly in the context that, we have a fairly high price risk in our agriculture commodities. Now, we should also look at, what are the major factors contributing to a success of a futures market, just to keep in mind, so that our discussions will be, taking this into consideration. So as we have been discussing for a long time, of course, here as well as elsewhere in the world, product characteristics such as storability is important. Production centers, whether they are actually produced in large quantities in some, significant clusters and so on. And to what extent there are quality variations. Of course, quality variation will always be there to some extent, but too much of variation also actually creates problems, and so that's also an important product characteristic that we need to take into account. Then, of course, second one is exchange governance is very important in terms of designing of an appropriate contract, whether it is according to the required specifications by the buyers and sellers, and market and financial integrity, so especially with the national exchanges and with all the online trading and so on. This has been streamlined very well after 2003, 2004. And the other thing is the delivery mechanisms, so whether the delivery mechanism is efficient in terms of costs and time. So those who would like to take delivery or give delivery, whether they can do it quickly without much of a cost, and are there, quality issues. So that's where I think an important issue comes in, the quality issues, especially at the delivery time. And the other important sort of pillar of success of a futures contract is the government regulation and policies. To what extent government actually intervenes in the marketplace, sets prices and so on. And also, to what extent it facilitates futures trading. So something like standardization and so on, if you do it, then it becomes easier for the futures market to work. Now, so we did this study, Manu and myself, essentially looking at the quality aspects of agriculture commodities, mainly keeping these four commodities in mind: cardamom, pepper, coffee, and sugar. They are, right now they are not traded, and therefore, while they were traded for some time back, and it would be good to understand why they are not trading now and what can be done in order to make sure that they can be brought into derivatives trading. So while doing so, what we did is we looked at the spot prices and futures prices wherever it is available, and volume of the futures traded, futures trading also. And of course, the production of commodity, where it is going, it's increasing, decreasing, and so on, and whether it is, providing potential for larger amount of trading or not. And we also did the survey of market participants like traders, processors, and assayers in order to draw our conclusions. Now I will talk about these commodities one by one. So we'll be beginning with cardamom. As many of you know, Kerala produces about 90% of the cardamom in the country. And MCX had a contract, started futures trading in 2006. So, but since about 2012, the volume started going down. And after 2018, it really went down drastically. So, and that was the time when the FSSAI norms were made applicable to WDRA accredited warehouses, and the exchange warehouses are WDRA accredited warehouses, and that's where the link comes in, and therefore they have to follow the FSSAI norms. And once you follow the FSSAI norms, then there are more tests to be conducted. Generally, there are physical parameters, chemical parameters to be tested. Most of our markets, especially spot markets, go by the physical parameters. A lot of it is also just by visual or tactile kind of a test, not necessarily lab-oriented test. But if you want to go for chemical parameters, then you will have to, go for a chemical test, a lab test, which could take time, as well as it could be more expensive. And we can see in case of cardamom before 2018, the manual testing of physical parameter was done with the cost of testing was only about 900 rupees a lot. Whereas chemical testing, when it was introduced, the cost went up significantly, almost 7,150 rupees per lot, which is actually 8 times the increase. So that's significant. Apart from that, the time taken for testing also increased from 1 day to 10 to 15 days. So that's another major bottleneck that it creates while delivery of the contracts. So if you look at the the trends in the production, the exports and imports of cardamom, we do see that it has been increasing till about 2017-18, and then sort of dropped because of the flood and also some drought situations in the production areas. And because of that, we see the imports are increasing and the exports are decreasing. So that's a situation that we need to keep in mind, that in our country being having good climatic conditions to produce cardamom, we should really take a look at this and see how best we can actually improve production, because the consumption is going up because of income increases. Cardamom is something which people use it in many different dishes and so on, and therefore there is an increasing demand that's coming up. So we can see that the wholesale prices are actually going up, and therefore there is demand for cardamom, certainly. It's only a question of how do you meet those demands. Now, if you just look at the volume of contract, MCX futures contract, sometime during 2011 or 2009 onwards, I should say, till about 2016, it was, there were quite high volume of trading taking place, but then later on we see a dip in the volume of trading, and sort of leading to almost very small number of contracts being traded. So, of course, we could also look at the extent of price variation, which actually influences the extent of volume of trading also. if you look at these coefficient of variation, these are fairly high, which basically tells us that the volatility in the market has been high, and therefore there is a need for futures trading or a risk management instrument for the hedgers. So therefore, the need is there, but the thing is, how do we make it work? I think that's the challenge that we have. So if you look at some of the contracts which are already traded in the past, and if you look at how they have performed, there are certainly certain questions are being raised in terms of whether you can predict basis. Most of the time when you are talking about hedging, the question that arises is, can you predict basis? Basis prediction is very important for hedging purposes. But, in many cases, we have seen that the basis prediction is very low, and sometimes the maturity basis is also quite high. So that's a concern that one has to keep in mind. And when we talk to people in the trade, some of the problems that are identified by the market participants are, one is, of course, the quality differences, whereas physical market focuses on size and color. The delivery time, you need to go for chemical testing. So that's a major difference that we see. So in almost all cases, we would find that only when the testing methods are similar in case of spot and futures market, then it works very well, because you can just this is just arbitraging between the spot and futures market. So that facility is available only when quality standards are similar. But in our case, while the spot market is basically going for the physical parameters, the futures need to be looking for additional factors like the chemical parameters as well. So that's a difference. And the other dimension of this quality issue is that if you are exporting, then again, the pesticide residue comes in, and artificial colors, and also no harmful, chemicals being added and so on. So therefore, there are additional tests could also come in. And therefore, this harmonization is what is important in any market. In fact, we had talked about it a long time ago when the government of India wanted us to do a study on the WTO impact. And this is one thing that we said, see, our domestic market is different than the international markets. And that creates what is known as asymmetric trade opportunities. I think that's what we had said at that time. And this, unfortunately, it continues even today. In fact, at that time, it was in 1999, we had suggested to government a number of solutions. Of course, the reason to allow futures trading on the national platform also came into being as a byproduct of this discussion on the WTO, signing of WTO agreement, and it's coming to effect from 2000. So that's a little background. But that's unfortunately, we haven't done much about this, so trying to really harmonize the quality standards so that there is a smooth flow of goods, from let's say, one agent to another agent through different markets like physical markets or a futures market, and so on. So that has been a problem even now. So that's an area definitely needs to be focused upon in order to really streamline the agriculture markets, and especially when we talk about this doubling of farmers' income and so on. Otherwise, there would be several constraints, and where it leads to several intermediaries in between, which makes farmers' price realization very low. So the other problem, of course, that I identified was the production, as I mentioned it before. And the reasons that they have given, the market participants that they have given, essentially the same thing, that is high testing charges, delays in giving the report, which leads to only a small fraction of deliveries in the futures market. Spot and futures market are not well integrated, and there is little convergence of spot and futures market near maturity. So these are issues that they talked about, the market participant talked about, and most of it actually arises out of this synergy between the futures and the spot market. So that's therefore the quality issues are very important in terms of really making the markets strong, both futures and spot. Of course, if both for it's required for both markets, and the futures and spot markets always help each other in terms of strengthening the markets. So we also looked at whether there are other factors which are contributing to the futures market performance for these commodities. We looked at homogeneity, storability, and so on, which are also important. So in cardamom, of course, is not a problem as such. And clarity of grade specification is what we talked about in the spot and the futures market have different grade specification. That's where issues that come in. And volatility is also quite being there in this cardamom market. There should be possibility of futures trading, but this has not happened, or at least it sort of withered away in the recent years because of the quality issue. Now, so if we look at the value chain and then try to identify problems and how one can overcome this, and what are the policy suggestions that we can make, here are a few important ones. One is, of course, declining production, and for the countries we point, there has to be encouragement to increase the production. But in the production, see, it's not only for this cardamom, but also almost for all commodities. One thing that has to happen is there has to be a quality certification that we should be able to implement. So nowadays, there is this global gap certificate, which basically requires certain things to be followed. Is not so difficult, except that certain chemicals should not be used in cultivation and so on. And also documentation has to be done properly. And with the FPOs, Pharma Producer Organization, this is going to be easier in terms of giving the certification. So therefore, if such certifications are there, then there is no need for any testing possibility, because the process of production has gone through what are known as a good agricultural practices, and that's what global gap is basically good agricultural practices. And India is also trying to come up with an equivalent of INDGAP certificate. So that is something which we should really implement it. Of course, it is for the central and state government. Of course, central government is already have initiated certain actions, but it's a lot of it is there at the state government level, where if the state governments put in enough effort, then it should be possible to implement the INGAP or the global gap certification. This one. So with that, the quality assessment process becomes easier, because we already have a certification which basically says that there are no harmful chemicals and so on. So you don't have to go for these chemical testing, as long as in the value chain you make sure that this good manufacturing, good agricultural practices are followed. So that's one thing that should happen. In fact, it's good for all the commodities. Why don't we do this for all commodities of agriculture, so that you have a better certification. The consumers will have better knowledge about the products. They can feel safe about their product. Unlike now, a lot of times, whether it be fruits and vegetables and so on, we worry several times whether these have higher residues or not. And also we have seen that in the export market, there are many lots being rejected because of the higher levels of residues. I think we do have this problem quite severe, but we need to address that. And that's where I think it's important that we streamline our value chain in order to make sure that, both for domestic market and international market, we are able to provide good quality products. So in the as far as the derivatives market is concerned, my own suggestion would be sort of go for a forward contracting to begin with, because of right now, the volumes may not be very high. So at least for those people who would like to have a risk management function, they can do a forward contracting, and over a period of time, as it catches up, it can be traded on the futures. The second thing is the quality standards. Again, there are newer technologies coming in, which is very good, and many smaller companies are coming up and offering these technologies, and these are cutting edge technologies being used by many private companies. And we should seriously think about using these cutting edge technologies in order to reduce the cost as well as the time of assessment. I think that's the second important thing that we need to do. And the third one is actually, the futures contract. Futures contract is basically, it's a contract. So therefore, as far as testing for delivery is concerned, it should be according to the contract specification, not anything else. I think this is something which government should agree for, as far as futures is concerned. It's the testing should be limited to the what is specified in the contract. So as long as contract specification is met, then there should not be any problem. There should not be an additional feature brought into this. Then what essentially one is doing is you are constraining only one part of the market. So you're not streamlining this spot market, but you are constraining the futures market. And then again, one important function of the futures market will not be available for market participants, like the risk management and so on. So therefore, I think that's something which everybody should think through and make sure that this is basically, the futures contract should be delivered according to the specification in the contract. Now, I will, it's quite similar in case of pepper as well. So I will do it more quickly so that, we can get maybe questions and so on. Pepper is also produced in southern part, Karnataka, Kerala being the major producers of pepper. And the MCX also, had contracts till the year 2009. And of course, NCDEX also traded. And in 2013-14, so 12-13, there were this problem of mineral oil being there in the pepper that was to be delivered, and therefore there were issues, disputes, and then of course NCDEX also came forward and actually cleaned it up and then delivered the contract. So contract was reintroduced in 2017 on both exchanges, but the past legacy sort of remained, and volume was still low, and this had to be closed. So again, here also we see the physical parameter testing as well as the chemical testing. Again, if you compare the costs and time, similar kind of thing that we can find. that the cost of testing earlier was 3,000, but now it is almost about 9,000, which is 3 times the earlier cost. And also it takes a lot more time to do the testing. So, very similar story as in the case of cardamom. And again, we also here see that while the need, the consumption of pepper is increasing, the production is not able to catch up with the consumption, and therefore we see more of import happening. And therefore there is a case for encouraging production, and we can also see the price trends, and over a period of time it has been fairly, the price has been quite attractive. Only thing is the coefficient of variation is, we see, is very low, in the sense that the variation in the prices are not very high. That's one of the reasons why there's not much of a trading interest in trading, apart from the quality issues. So, so the problems that are identified are, one is of course this, the quality differences between the physical and the futures market, and also the lower prices since 2016-17, partly because of the import from Sri Lanka. So, so these are the issues, reasons for decrease in the trading. We already talked about. So when we looked at this commodity market as such, we also see quite similar kind of factors. That means, as far as homogeneity and storability is concerned, there is not much of an issue, except that the quality clarity is not there, and therefore it creates an amount of problems. Volatility is certainly low, but of course, most of these plantation crops do have these cycles of higher and lower volatility. Now, therefore, the suggestions are quite similar to what we have discussed in the case of cardamom. So production is not increasing, and therefore I think it's important to encourage production, because this demand is going to go up. Of course, there is also export demand, and as well as the domestic demand, it should be encouraged. And also one should pay attention to the higher pepperin content. That's one of the reasons why some imports are being done, and therefore research should focus on better varieties of pepper, which can actually increase, which would have higher content of pepperin. Again, one can start with the forward contracting because of the production has not caught up, and then now a lot more is imported, and then as it catches up, one can actually go for a futures contract as well. And as far as quality standard is concerned, again, at the production level, if we are able to take care of it through INGAP, Global Gap certificate, and then you sort of, throughout the chain, if you are able to keep those standards, then a lot of these testing issues will not be there. As well as adopting newer technology like the computer vision, NIR, NMR, and so on, which have been quite useful in testing the agriculture commodity quality parameters. And again, I think it's important that we should have a system where FSSAI and relevant boards, for example, cardamom also prices low. So they should actually come to an agreement that, okay, these are the standards that we need to have, and these are the assessment method. I think it has to be very clear to the users, so that there is no confusion about the quality testing. So yeah, again, as we talked about in the case of cardamom also, as far as futures contract delivery is concerned, it should be with respect to the contract specifications. Now, if you look at, we will also briefly look at coffee and sugar. So coffee again produced again in the southern states. Main varieties are Robusta and Arabica. Most of the Indian production is actually Robusta coffee. And if you look at the market, marketing of coffee, uh, there are major processors, about 10, 15 major processors who actually deal with most of the coffee in India. And a lot of it is actually exported. So about 80% of it is actually exported. And the pricing is basically sort of linked to the London and New York markets for these two different varieties. And therefore, not much of, most of the pricing decisions or price discovery process is dependent on these two markets. In terms of quality specification, there is fairly good set of quality parameters already identified. FSSI and the coffee board have quite similar parameters, except that FSSAI always has all this, the added color and harmful substances, which is true for all the food products that's there in the market. So that also, of course, creates certain issues. Now, so if you look at coffee production, exports, and all of them are going up. And of course, even import is going up. And definitely in terms of volume, there is there, but since the most of people are actually using the international markets, I think there is a window that is available for the derivatives market is probably between the producers and the processors. So that's probably an area that one should focus on. So, when we looked at this market again with respect to these different features of the commodity like homogeneity, storability, and so on, there is no issue as such. Even the grade standard specification is also clear, especially since it's actually exported. While there are major varieties like Arabica and Robusta, each one of them is fairly large quantity. So therefore, it's not such a big issue problem in case of coffee. Only thing is the price discovery process is linked to the international markets. So most of the processors, exporters tend to use the international futures. So there is a window, of course, as we talked about earlier, that one could look at the transaction between the producers and the processors, exporters. Now, sugar is another commodity. I think all of us know. It is one of the largest agro-based commodity. UP produces large amount, almost 50% of the sugar cane in India. The other states being Maharashtra, Karnataka, and Tamil Nadu. So the sugar contracts were also introduced. Of course, in earlier, I think it has far back as 2003 or 4. I remember there was a special exchange was initiated to trade in sugar. So many attempts are made, but again, this has not been successful. While the sugar production has been increasing and so on, and a lot of other things that are taking place in sugar industry. So we see while the few spikes of sugar volumes that has happened in the past, but because of the government intervention, we see very low variation, fluctuations in the prices, and therefore there is not much of an interest in the sugar futures. So in terms of quality parameters, and there are very standard quality parameters. ICUMSA units, moisture and size. Though there is some difference between the international market and domestic markets, like the COMSA index less than 150 is what is domestic market specifies, whereas export market requires less than 100. So there is some differences there. Apart from that, sugar is actually a good commodity to be traded, except for the government intervention, very high intervention in the marketplace. So their government policy has been both, of course, at the sugarcane level, there is a minimum support price announced by the central government, as well as the state government. State advisory prices are announced. And then there is a now minimum selling price introduced by the government, which actually makes sugar factories to sell at certain prices, from their factories. So therefore, essentially, the extent to which government actually intervenes in this market is very high, and because of that, we see very low price variations compared to many other commodities. And therefore, in fact, it's time that government sort of it's not because of the futures market alone, but government can actually withdraw from the sugar sector and make it more vibrant, because a lot of what has happened so far is there is a huge arrears that needs to be paid by the factories to the farmers every year. That's a big issue. And also many sugar factories have not really improved their technology or invested in additional technology for power generation, co-generation, and so on. So all these things would happen if you leave it to the market forces. So if they can pay, have in fact, long-term contracts with the purchasers, and then give a long-term contract to the farmers, we can essentially solve that problem. And as it happens in many other places, I think we should really look for such solutions, market-based solutions, which can make these sectors very vibrant. So we were looking at this quality testing technology, which I just mentioned. There are these different technologies, and some companies have already come up with these technologies and helping many private companies in terms of assessing quality. So to reduce the amount of time that is taken. Sometimes it may be very, within minutes you may be able to get the results. So therefore, that's the area that we need to focus on in order to streamline agriculture markets. So in conclusion, what I would like to say is, both in case of cardamom pepper, we need to look at production side. One is increasing production, and second one is the in-gap certificate kind of thing. We should introduce not only, of course, these two commodities, but almost all agriculture commodities that would help the farmers very much in getting higher value and also create more demand for our products. One can export more easily without going through another set of quality certification. I knew a long time ago, almost sometime middle of 1990s, an cumin exporter used to take tarpaulin and give it to the producers. Please use this to do a post-harvest operation so that it will have a less fecal content. So these are problems that we have in our agricultural marketing value chain, and some of these can be addressed by following these processes such as in-gap and global gap certificate, and that's going to be an important avenue for improving the quality in the agricultural market. So we are not only, we should be just thinking about only futures market, but commodity value chain itself has to be streamlined. That is where our farmers will get better prices, our farmers will get better opportunity to export. all our markets will start operating much better. Whether it's futures, spot market, and so on, they will start operating much better if we are able to address this particular issue. So yeah, we talked about even lab is also, when you talk about chemical testing and so on, even number of labs is also a problem. You will have to take it to some longer distance, located labs and get it tested. So high cost, long time taken, as well as, of course, distant is also another factor. So I will stop at this. I think if you have any questions, just yeah. In terms of policy suggestions, I will just sort of repeat what I said so far. Encouraging production of cardamom and pepper to meet the domestic demand, quality certification like INGAP and global gap certificates, standardize testing methods through emerging technologies. So the near infrared and this magnetic resonance and so on, nuclear magnetic resonance technologies, computer visioning and so on, those are emerging technologies should be used. And of course, facilitate forward contracting, let it happen. Exchanges in themselves can be a platform for forward contracting to take place. And in some cases, like sugar industry, now it is time that they should deregulate sugar industry. Especially, I think now there is a new variety, seem to be doing a lot of changes in terms of not only in terms of increasing production, but also in terms of sugar recovery. So which seem to have been helping both sugar factories and sugar farmers. So maybe it's a right time to deregulate it so that there is a vibrant sugar sector that emerges, and the markets are able to work on their own. So yeah, in case of sugar, I think if we are able to have long-term contracts between the sugar factories and the purchasers, and then sugar factories in turn giving a long-term contract with the farmers, that should actually solve the problem. So I'll stop at this, and if there are any questions, I will be very happy to answer. Manu is also here, so if there are anything Manu would like to add, I'll.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, sir, for this wonderful presentation. I think all of us have gained a lot of knowledge from this presentation. We couldn't have asked for more. Actually, as a matter of fact, although most of us are aware of some of the issues that you have highlighted over here, I think coming from somebody as erudite as you, from a different perspective, we have definitely got a lot of insights. However, nevertheless, there are, as much as we are thankful for this presentation, we also have lots of questions, and time permitting, we'll take a few.
Yeah.
I will start from, sir, from one of the most novel, elements in the report that you have mentioned, and several times in the presentation also you have mentioned, which is about these new technologies. Somehow this new technologies or adoption of this new technology seems to be showing some ray of hope, some ray of some light of hope in kind of breaking the Gordian knot that is present in the entire issue of quality standardization. So you have mentioned of this kind of technologies like near infrared or nuclear magnetic resonance (NMR), which can reduce not only the cost but also the time for the testing, the physical and chemical testing. So just wanted to have an idea. Can you give us an idea about how well established or popular these tests are among the market participants? Of course, we are aware. You have also mentioned that there are several private firms which are offering these tests. The bigger question is, are they scalable? And I think the biggest question is, will the government agencies or the regulators accept these tests as sacrosanct, as acceptable for the purpose of, let's say, delivery on the exchange accredited warehouses? What's your, could you give us an idea?
Yeah, in terms of course, these are all newer technologies, and therefore it will have its own time lag in terms of adoption. Certainly, I see a number of companies are already very good companies. The top end of the agri processing companies, they are already using these technologies for their own purposes. I think, which is good. So that's one thing. Second thing is, again, many of these technologies have to be perfected, so over a period of time, because, if you are saying, I'm going to use a chemical testing methodology, then we need to see what is an equivalent of an electronic methodology, so therefore there is a calibration required in order to say that, if this is the reading, this is what it means, and so on. Okay, so because
Okay.
most of it is basically through the electronic waves and so on, and therefore, you'll have to calibrate those this one. So therefore, in any case, I think we need to pay attention to these things. In the world over, this has been being used, and in many cases they are more precise, and they can be bias free, because they just they give you reading, and then it can be automatically transferred, so there is no manual handling of this quality issues. And in our country, that's one of the problems, right? So how do you trust the assessing agency? That itself is an issue. Whereas in these cases, if there are electronic way of assessing it, it's also easy to transfer data. So it becomes very transparent way of doing it. But then, we also need to pay a lot of attention to make it proper. And so that's where even the government agencies also should be paying a lot of attention in terms of making these technologies proper, and recognize it. That's very important.
Yes.
So, you look at all our technologies, you take solar, and, we have moved from very, crude, this one, to now sophisticated, this one, right? So, electric vehicles and so on. So we will have a development phase, but I think many of these things are already at a stage where they can be used very quickly. It's a question of how regulators recognize it, how they take interest in really seeing through. Some of it we actually read it in the research articles, because researchers are doing it and publishing it, and some of it is quite a long time back, but we have not caught up with that. That's the that's the problem, and we need to really catch up with the newer technology, cutting edge technology. That's where we need to get benefits from the technology. There's one thing that has not happened in our country, that benefits of technology, except for a few things, maybe payment, electronic payment, and so more recently, because of certain circumstances, we are able to do that. Otherwise, we don't worry too much. But that's where I think needs to be, unless we, I have seen in agriculture, in the whole value chain, there are a lot of technologies you can use, very good technologies. It will improve productivity, it will improve quality, it will improve the efficiency, and so on. But problem is, that the adoption has been very so that's where I think we need to pay attention. It's whether it is CPAI, whether it is exchanges, whether it's a regulator, we all have to put together our brains, and then think through how we can solve the problem. We want to solve problems, right? So definitely it is possible to do it, but we need to collectively do it, and we can't just work in an isolated way. A regulator is different than the market participants, and so on, and that's where we have issues.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, it's a mix of both absorption as well as acceptance
Yeah.
and recognition. I think all of these three need to work in tandem. Otherwise,
That's,
agri tech will remain niche, always remain niche. They
yeah,
will not be mainstreamed.
that's right.
Sir, I have another question about another very critical element that you have highlighted, which is about the quality standards in the different market segments, in different markets as with trade. So you have the spot market, you have the exports market, the futures market, and the quality parameters are different. Although the stakeholders are the same, and the issue is that they need to harmonized. Again, I'm probably getting into a operational issue, but how does one harmonize this given the fact that the regulatory entities for each of these markets are different? So who do you think should if I have to directly ask you, who should take the lead in doing this harmonization across these markets, considering that the commodities are the same and the stakeholders are the same?
Yeah, so look at the problems in agriculture, quality issues. Most of the problems arise because, at the production stage, you don't regulate it properly because, you have banned many chemicals, but they are still used, for some form or the other. There will be some cocktail of pesticides available in the market. The farmer brings in and then sprays it. Now, the thing is, that cocktail should not be allowed, right? So unless we are able to control these things, that's where I was talking about, sorry, the state agencies really, pay attention to come up with the IND gap. We have this, global gap certificate is there. That's only, we apply it only to the exports, but not to the domestic market. Saying that, okay, domestic, it's okay if your MRL is more and so on, it doesn't make any sense, right? So, but, we can actually give, the global gap certificate for a large area, making sure that, okay, these chemicals are not used. It needs only that. So, again, one of the development that is happening is also FPUs. Now, FPUs, now we are in a little better position. If not the government, at least the FPO can, sort of tell their members not to use these chemicals and get a global gap certificate. Otherwise, it's a easier thing actually. The government can, when they say ban the pesticide, don't allow it anywhere to be sold in the marketplace. Then everybody's agriculture practices are proper. So then you can have this, certificate. But, if you don't pay attention to the production stage, then later on becomes very difficult. So let us say if there is a higher, residue in the product itself. So what can you do, as a trader or a, processor and so on? You can't do anything, right? So that's where these things have to be, started from the very beginning and throughout the value chain, and then progressively. Yeah, I think we need to create a lot of awareness, awareness about these things. These are somehow, a lot of times people think about doubling farmers' income by paying MSP. It's not that. Why don't you do these things? If you do these things, then naturally the price they get will be more, and you can export. You get a higher price in the international market because your quality is good. All these things will happen. But that's where I think we need to pay attention so that we can solve these issues.
Okay. So there are a lot of curiosity among the participants about one element that you have mentioned, which is about adopting forward trades in situations where you cannot have probably a viable futures trade in the in given the present state of the market. Particularly, I think for commodities where the volume of production is not very high.
Oh, correct.
So, what role do you see of exchanges or let's say the exchange ecosystem in if you want to start forward trades in commodities rather than futures?
Yeah, in our country, there is a trust deficit, especially, in the value chain and so on, right? So a mechanism by which we have been able to address it fairly successfully is exchanges. Exchanges don't have so many problems in terms of disputes, right? They have almost solved that. And compared to those regional exchanges and so on, there used to be many problems because of various reasons. But now exchanges have almost, solved the, the trust issues. So therefore, I think exchanges can still play a major role in the forward contract, because whether they deliver the right quality, whether they deliver at all, and so on. Those are issues which needs to be addressed, and I think exchanges can play an important role in that.
So are you referring to the forward segment in a futures exchange that some exchanges
Yeah,
had some years back? Okay,
correct.
that kind of a
Yes,
mechanism.
yes, that's right.
Okay, all right. So, sir, again, coming back to the quality issue, the quality standard issue, it is kind of a, as you would have seen from your study, and we in the market also, as kind of quite perceptive of it, that it's one of the very serious issues. And this is a serious issue which is not only for the currently listed futures contracts, like, cardamom and pepper, which is like, as you have noted, that it has both these contracts are kind of uh, you know uh, progressing towards a zero trade and probably will be delisted.
Yeah.
But also for all kinds of edible agricultural
Yes.
contracts which need a futures market. So if this is an issue for all edible items, all consumable items in the in agriculture agri space, are we staring at a situation where no futures contract can ever be launched on commodity exchanges unless those issues are totally eliminated, or those addressed? And therefore, we are probably staring at a are we staring at a long time gap, because these things cannot be sorted out. As I was telling, the Gordian knot cannot be broken overnight. So are we looking at a kind of a temporal gap when all these issues will be addressed, and then we start looking at a successful futures market in these kind of contracts? I mean, what is the way out, you see?
Yeah, see, there is one thing that I said in my presentation is, see, when you are coming up with any quality standards, you have to work with, one is the concerned body, like for example, FSSAI will have to work with the Spices Board. Spices Board also have to work with the trade associations and so on. So in order to make sure whether this is something doable or not, right? So unless it is practicable, you can't just have a quality standard which is which is of no use, and it will only it will be a bottleneck in the trade, usual trade itself. So that's why what is needed is FSSAI, other bodies, commodity bodies, and trades, like the CPAI, which is, in looking at the commodity sector, they should sit together and see what can be done. While we are very much concerned about consumer welfare, in terms of, you can't just give anything to the consumer. That's definitely not there. But can we make sure that this whole process is streamlined, so that the producers get better prices, he or she will be happy, the intermediaries don't have headache, and the consumers don't have headache. So all these things have to be sorted out. And as I said, I mentioned earlier, see, why don't we go for something like an INDGAP certificate? Now, who is going to give who should do it? It is the state government. Why don't we sit with state government? These are the FSSI, if they are the standard setting agencies, they also have to look at all these, and everybody should come together, like what happens in many other countries. They should come together and say that, okay, so this is a way we can work out, so that we can streamline the whole value chain. It's not that I'm sitting somewhere and setting standards, whether it is implementable or not. That's going to create more problem for the sectors and the markets and participants and so on. I think this approach is something which we need to adopt. Everybody collectively address problems. We need to address problem. We need to do it collectively. It's not just one agency. It's the stakeholders with that particular commodity or the commodity sector. should really come together and solve it. I think that's where we need to take it up at the right forum and make everybody understand this, so that there is a process that starts, so that in order to take care of this problem.
Absolutely. And I think there is an element of urgency in this. We
Yes.
of course need to have an element of urgency, given that in the absence of this, some kind of inefficiencies seem to be creeping into the market. So the more
Sure,
we
sure.
delay, probably the more inefficient this market will become, as long as these contracts are there. So I think we have time for just one last question. Just if you give us one big recommendation for exchanges and one big recommendation for, let's say, the regulator for
Exchanges,
given
I
given
think,
the yeah.
yeah, exchanges, one is, of course, looking at these technologies and how it can be used in, delivery of contracts and so on. And probably look at the forward contracting as a way to address the, risk management for, smaller commodities. Whereas regulator is concerned, I think we need to look at the overall perspective of the whole value chain. How do we streamline value chain? That has to be the key issue for any regulator. So who has to be involved? How we can do that? What is that method? How, so that that we don't create issues for individuals and sectors and the actors and the stakeholders, but we address the problem and solve that problem. I think that approach has to come in order to make sure that we have a more smoother value chain, where everybody can actually work more peacefully. And that will give you enormous benefit to everybody, because as I told you, it was in 1998 or 1999 we talked about asymmetric trade opportunities. A farmer do not have the same kind of an opportunity that, let's say, a US farmer or a UK farmer has, because he or she can sell either in the domestic market or elsewhere, or export it, whereas our farmers can't do it. They will have to undergo several other this thing.
Challenges. Yeah.
That's a big if you look at some of the price comparisons. I did a case on the grapes. How the Nasik grape growers were able to increase their price realization almost 3 times by really going through these processes such a way that quality is actually maintained. And that's the kind of potential we have. It's only a question of our regulators and others, policymakers come together and then address this issue.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for this wonderful session. That's all we have time for now. Before we end, I request Mr. Sandeep Jain, Chairman, Seminar and Convention Committee of CPAI and Director of Trade Swift Jaipur, to kindly give the vote of thanks and the concluding remarks. Mr. Jain, please. Mr. Sandeep Jain, are you able to unmute yourself? Hello, Mr. Jain.
Yeah, hi, Devojyoti, hi. Hello, everyone. So sorry, I'm just a bit late. Yeah.
Request you to kindly give the vote of thanks and the concluding remarks, Mr. Jain.
Yeah. So actually, I was just listening to Mr. Nayak, Mr. Bansal, and Wadhwaji started with his remarks. So basically, it's a very burning issue. Certainly, it's a, in fact, whenever we started this business as a broker, we actually thought this problem has to be the biggest problem whenever it came to the deliveries of agri commodities. And we are trying to address those issues only. And in fact, in infrastructure like India's, I think it's a very big issue, and quality issues, as we have discussed in very minute details. So I think it's a very good topic to start. And in fact, it is the beginning of the topic. And in fact, if we have to encourage the hedging in agri commodities, so we really need to actually work on the quality issues. So thank you so much, Professor Gopal Naik, for the comprehensive presentation, and Mr. Manu Bansal and Mr. Devojyoti De and Rishi Nathani ji and Wadhwa ji for the opening remarks. And thank you so much to everyone. Yeah. And thank you so much to all the attendees for being a great audience.
Thanks, Mr. Jain. And thank you again, Professor Naik and Dr. Manu Bansal. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, CPI. And with that, we end our session for today. And we will probably come back again with another research study and discuss all of that in the not so far